Gordon Lightfoot's hit song, The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, was released in 1976 to memorialize the sinking of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald in Lake Superior the previous year. Ahead, I'll talk with John U. Bacon about the Gales of November, the untold story of the Edmund Fitzgerald. We'll learn about the history of the ship, its crew, and its tragic demise. I'm Dan Skinner. This is Some Books Considered. John U. Bacon is a multi-New York Times best-selling author of 14 books on sports, business, and history. John, welcome to Some Books Considered.
Dan, thank you.
Well, I think a lot of people heard of the Edmund Fitzgerald from that Gordon Lightfoot song, which came out in 1976, which was in commemoration of the sinking, which happened the year before. But I'm not sure that everyone realizes that that's based on real-life events. And clearly with this book, you'll let people know that that wasn't a story that Gordon Lightfoot made up. It really happened.
I can confirm, Dan, after 6 weeks of book touring, the book came out October 7th, and I've done 24 events in 6 weeks from Miami to Montana, that people, even highly educated people in line to get their book signed, tell me two things. And one of them you already got to, which is that it's a fictional. I'm a writer. It's a fictional account. No, it's not, of course. And then two, they might think that it was from the 1800s, a schooner, Civil War times and so on. No, this is November 10th, 1975. And even though the song has been out there for 50 years and is quite popular even now, people are sometimes surprised to learn that. So you are correct.
So let's go back to before that tragic incident and give us a little history of the ship, because at the time it was a remarkable ship. So tell us a little bit about what led up to its construction, and let's learn more about the history of the Edmund Fitzgerald.
Sure. I learned a lot in this book, and I thought I knew the story pretty well when I pitched it to my publisher. I have to tell you, Dan, that about 95% of what's in that book I did not know 4 years ago. So including the fact that this ship was very popular and famous before it went down, at least in shipping circles. It was the Titanic of its time in its field, basically. So it launched on January 7th, 1958 by Edmund Fitzgerald himself. He was the CEO of Northwestern Mutual Insurance, a real person. And his son said that was the best day of his life. And they had 15,000 people in Detroit come out to see the launching. That's more than the Detroit Tigers averaged that year. So gives you some sense of the hullabaloo. And the Detroit News said that this is the greatest object ever put into the Great Lakes. And it was. It was the longest at 729 feet. It could carry the most cargo. It was one of the fastest. It set every record on the Great Lakes and then broke them. For biggest load, fastest load, most per season. It was a heavyweight. It was a sprinter. It was a workhorse all in one. And it was luxuriously appointed in the living quarters. Not the cargo holds, of course, which is most of the ship. These guys had plush carpeting. They had wood-paneled walls. They had tiled bathrooms. They had TVs and air conditioners. And in 1958, hotels didn't even have those things in the North. So it was quite amazing. And why do that? To attract the best captain, the best crew, and the VIPs got the staterooms, which were the equivalent of anything on the Queen Elizabeth at the time. And of course, that's how you keep your clients happy. So they were never lonely on that ship.
Well, tell us about the importance of the trade on the Great Lakes at that time in our history.
It's another shocker to me because Great Lakes shipping is kind of an invisible industry, basically. We know, as one of my sources said, we know the farmer, the factory worker, the fisherman, and the miner, but no one knows the sailor. And I was wondering about that. And the reason is there are only 30 per ship. That's not very many for a big ship. And even in the heyday, they only had 300 ships. So that's 9,000 people spread out over 8 Great Lakes states, including Indiana, of course. You're not going to meet them. And even if they live next door, you're not going to meet them because that guy's on a ship 9 months out of the year with no breaks in those days. So no anniversaries, no graduations, no birthdays. It's a very hard life in many ways, but the pay was great. Union contracts. A deckhand could make 3 or 4 times more than a teacher did at that time. And then a deckhand is the lowest ranking guy on the ship, basically. In today's dollars, that'd be around $180,000 with overtime. That's serious money. You don't need a high school degree and all that. These guys are smart guys, but often self-educated. So that's the lifestyle. Shipping itself, how about this? Shipping is 3 times more efficient than trains and 6 times more efficient than trucks. Not 60%, but 600%. It's not even close. So as a result, whatever you can put on a ship, you put on a ship. And it happens that this region is one of the most fertile for almost all natural resources. You've got, of course, lumber. You've got grain. They export more from the Great Lakes than any other country in the world. How about that? You've got limestone that turns iron into steel. That's essential. You've got copper. The copper rush made 3 times more money than the gold rush. And no one knows that because that's where electricity comes from, of course. And the wires in your house right now are probably copper. Then, of course, iron ore topped them all. And that's how we won World War II with the arsenal of democracy. The iron from the north comes down to Willow Run near Detroit and builds one B-24 Liberator bomber per hour every hour for 3 years. And that's how you beat them. So then, of course, from 1945 to 1975, that iron production goes to cars. And that's why in 1958, the year this ship was launched, of the Forbes 100 biggest companies in the United States, 37, more than a third, revolved around Detroit. It was truly the Silicon Valley before Silicon Valley. And there's one last fun fact for you, Dan, I can't resist. In 1960, pick the Florida town, and you might because you already read the book, but pick the Florida town that was bigger than Miami, Jacksonville, Tampa, Nashville, Tennessee, and San Jose, California. And the beer-winning answer is Toledo, Ohio. How about that?
It was a massive ship, as you pointed out, at the time. It was the largest at the time it was launched. And I think, if I remember correctly, it was only 18 years old at the time of this incident. And you write that even though at that point it was no longer the largest, it was arguably still the most popular ship that was, going up and down the Great Lakes.
That's true. Well done, Yan. It was the exception proved the rule. You think, okay, it's popular because it's the biggest one of the Great Lakes. Well, in 72, a handful of 1,000-footers came on the Great Lakes that carry 62% more than Edmund Fitzgerald does. Those are colossal numbers, obviously. It didn't matter. This ship was still the golden boy, basically. So these guys knew that if you're on the Edmund Fitzgerald, get a haircut because you're going to get your photo taken each time you go to the Soo Locks, which connect Lake Superior to Lake Huron, or Detroit, or Port Huron, Michigan, or Toledo. The crowds would come out by the hundreds to see this ship go by and take your photo. It was a rock star, truly.
Let's talk a bit about the research. As you pointed out, most of this you didn't know when you decided to do this. And I guess even before that, I'm curious about what led you to want to tell this story.
Well, a lot of things, of course. One, I felt I should know more about Great Lakes shipping. I'm from Michigan. I've been in all the Great Lakes. I've done the Port Huron to Mackinac sailboat race, etc. But none of us know that much about it, really. So that's one certainly driving fact there. Yes, I want to know what happened because it's still a bit of a mystery. And I think we advance certain theories and weaken others. There's some new material in here for sure about what happened, which is somewhat bold, I think. But the real motivating factor was the 29 men on board. What were their jobs like? What were their lives like on board? What were their lives like at home? What were their families like? And I want to know all that because the untold part truly is that. And I got to 14 of the 29 families to flesh that out. And none of them had talked to a reporter before. So all that's new. I got to 6 crewmen who'd been on the ship, obviously before it went down, because all 29 men went down with the ship, including 2 that were on that year who knew the captain, knew the crew, and could talk knowledgeably about all of it. I even got to one guy, Rick Barthuli, I think probably the last surviving member of the Arthur Anderson crew. The Arthur Anderson chased the Edmund Fitzgerald that night, about an hour behind. On November 10th, 1975. That's as close as we can get to an eyewitness of what it felt like to be on the lake that night with 30-foot waves and more. And he was great. So we got to a bunch of people that no one's talked to before. That is what truly drove me to find out what these people were all about.
Well, as you pointed out, this has been investigated for decades and not really, as far as I can tell, any particular cause of this accident other than Mother Nature itself, that the ship was just no match for what it came up against.
That's a good place to start. And the odd part is with all these conferences I go to now and all these speeches and counter opinions and so on, almost no one ever talks about the storm. Start there and work backwards. This was a storm of the century. It had 2 storms coming in one from Canada, one from Southwest United States. Cold and dry, hot and wet. That's not good when they combine. right in front of Whitefish Bay. Whitefish Bay basically serves as the drain of Lake Superior at the end of your bathtub, basically. And it sets up shop right in front of Whitefish Bay, like a catcher guarding home plate. So start there and work backwards. But as John Tanner said, one of my experts, that when a big ship like this goes down, it is rarely one thing that takes it down. It's a series of events. Nature, how the ship was built, mechanical failures, human decisions, and so on, that all combine to have the dominoes start falling. And as he said, when the dominoes start falling, watch out. It gets ugly fast. And I still go back to Ruth Hudson, the mother of Bruce Hudson, deckhand on the ship, her only child, very sad, obviously, who said, ultimately only 30 know, 29 men and God, and as I add, and no one's talking. So we can never say almost anything with complete certainty.
The captain was known for taking some risks, but you can't blame him for what happened here, because even the forecast wasn't accurate, so they really didn't know what they were heading into.
Exactly right, Dan. They knew too little, too late. That's certainly fair to say. So, yes, there was forecast, and yes, there was some communication, but they're both weak, and they could have been stronger even in 1975. There was a great complacency that had enveloped the industry, and that changed when the ship went down. We'll get to that, I'm sure. But yeah, you've got these two storms coming in. They knew about half of it. They didn't know about the southwestern storm. They certainly had no sense of the severity. Even Captain Ernest McSorley, the Edmund Fitzgerald's captain, considered the most aggressive and the most skilled captain on the Great Lakes out of 300. Even he, I'm sure, would have gone into a nice, tidy bay here if he had any idea what was really out there that night. And they really didn't. So, I mean, at the end, where the Fitzgerald ends up, and only the Fitzgerald, the Anderson was about an hour behind, about 15 miles behind or so at that point. David Schwab, one of my experts who does this stuff for Michigan and Michigan Tech and other universities, has got a computer model, and you can chart it so you can see that the Edmund Fitzgerald, as he says, ends up in exactly the wrong spot at exactly the wrong time, 7 o'clock on that Monday night. The winds were up 100 miles per hour. That is hurricane force. And the waves are getting from 30, 40, 50, even 60 feet high. And this thing only has 11 feet out of the water on a good day. And this, obviously, Dan, is not a good day. So, yes, all that combined.
Now, the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald was discovered shortly after it went down. What can you tell us about what they learned upon seeing the ship?
Well, it's kind of the opposite of Titanic. Titanic, you knew immediately in May of 1912 that the iceberg did it. Then it took them 83 years to find the ship. This is just the opposite. It took about 3 or 4 days to find the ship in the bottom of Lake Superior, about 530 feet down, which is obviously pretty deep. They found it with sonars. Coast Guard did, good for them. But the cause of it was, again, still a mystery somewhat. So they found the first third of the ship, the bow, standing upright on the bottom. Pretty close, not too far away, was the stern upside down, the bottom third. The middle third is basically destroyed, just debris and taconite, which is what they're carrying, iron ore pellets at that point. So that's what they found on the bottom. Some clues are down there for sure, which have been helpful to try to surmise what happened. But again, nothing certain.
And from what I understand, this is considered basically a sacred site in many ways. It's a protected site to be treated with reverence and not disturbed.
Correct. And the families, by the way, fought for that because after the 5th or 6th dive went down there and they did not like the divers, as a private group that did it, trying to make money, with videotape of dead crewmen floating in this life jacket. All 29 men are entombed, by the way, in one of the two sections and have not come up. So once they saw that and they're trying to sell taconite and some other stuff, they said no more. So they worked very hard with the Canadian government. It's just barely in Canadian water to have this site declared an international grave site, which it now is, which means no one can dive on it without the permission of the Ontario government, and they will not do it without the permission of the families. So there's still a fight over that. Some people want to do it, but the families are steadfast that no, they do not want that, and they've won that battle.
Let's talk a bit about the changes that happened after the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald and the impact it had on the industry.
It's incredible. Two incredible stats for you, Dan, and I'm not sure which one is more incredible. From 1875 to 1975, there were 6,000 commercial shipwrecks on the Great Lakes, not rowboats, but freighters and whatnot. And that is the low count. Some say 10,000, some say 25,000, but let's call it 6,000. That is one per week, every week for a century. That's incredible. 30,000 crew lost. That's one per day, every day for a century. That's how dangerous these lakes are. And perhaps my biggest shock, Dan, that I got from my experts, including guys who've worked on commercial ships on the ocean as well as on the Great Lakes, that the Great Lakes are actually more dangerous than the Atlantic Ocean, which I wouldn't have believed in a million years. Now, both are dangerous, don't get me wrong. Both can be serious, and these guys are all brave guys. But the kind of waves you get in the Great Lakes without the salt water smashing down the points and spreading them out, you get sharp, pointy waves on like a roller coaster on the Atlantic, and they come twice as fast, not 10 to 16 seconds apart, but 4 to 8 seconds apart. And the storms, more importantly, as they say in the ocean, they could be 500 or 1,000 miles away. On the Great Lakes, they tell me it is a locally occurring storm. And I said, what does that mean? And they said, it's over your damn head. And you've been on the Great Lakes. It can whip up very quickly on the Great Lakes. So that's how you get that crazy number of shipwrecks. After November 10th, 1975, the night that this ship goes down, there have been 0. And now we're at 50 years plus. I know 6,000 in a century, 0 for a half century. And the reason is the Edmund Fitzgerald. This was Titanic. After Titanic, what do you get? You get more lifeboats on all the ships. They wake up. And this was like 9/11 for the shipping industry. This is a wake-up call. This was the Golden Boy. It shouldn't have gone down. Should have lasted another 60 years easily. So this obviously put the shock into them. Forecasting greatly improved. Communications with the captains greatly improved. And frankly, just good old common sense. In the old days, when it's 30-mile-per-hour winds and 10-foot waves, you go. It's not even a question. And the day after, the 49th anniversary last year, on November 11th, 1975, I was up at Whitefish Point. That's my picture, by the way, in the flap of the book, getting all the wind in my face, 30, 40-mile-per-hour winds, 10-foot waves. Every single ship in Whitefish Bay was anchored. And I guarantee you, Dan, that 50 years ago, not one of them would have been. So common sense finally kicked in.
Well, there's so much more in this book that we won't have time to talk about. What would you say are the key takeaways or key understandings that you hope people will take away about the Edmund Fitzgerald after reading your book?
I would say the Great Lakes are bigger than you think. Superior is bigger than Ireland. That's how big it is. They're more dangerous than you think. Shipping is more important than anyone thinks. And that's where the cement in your basement comes from, the car in your driveway, the food on your table. It's all Great Lakes shipping. But finding that this ship was special. It was special before it went down, and after it went down, it was such a big deal that it fixed the industry. As one of my experts said, when do you fix anything? When it's broken. And this was the breaking, if you will, that finally woke them up. So the families are well aware of that fact. And they're proud of the fact that no one's had to suffer like they have for all these years.
To learn more, the book is The Gales of November, The Untold Story of the Edmund Fitzgerald by John U. Bacon. John, thank you for talking with me today.
Dan, a pleasure. They can find out more at johnubacon.com.
If you'd like to purchase The Gales of November, I've placed a link for you in the description below. If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe, like, and click on the bell so you know when I post new interviews. Meanwhile, here are 2 more books you might find interesting. I'm Dan Skinner. Thank you for watching this edition of Some Books Considered.